Hi, Paul Coker here from One Bloody Drop, and today I'm here with Robby Barbaro. I met Robby back in 2016 on a diabetes retreat in LA, and Robby shared with me some of his phenomenal knowledge about diabetes and nutrition. And I'm really excited today to be sat here and to be able to share some of his knowledge with you. So Robby, tell us a little bit about yourself and about your journey with type 1 diabetes.
I'm really excited to be here, so thank you for having me, and we were so honored to have you come to our retreat. It was the Mastering Diabetes Retreat in Southern California that Cyrus and I run together. So that was really, really fun, and it's good to see you in person again. You know, the computer and the digital stuff is fun, but the in-person connection is really, really nice, so glad to be here. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 12, just about to turn 13, and I'm 29 right now. So my family was actually quite familiar with the condition because my older brother also has type 1 diabetes, but my oldest does not. And so he was actually breastfed, and then my other brother and I were not breastfed as much. And that's an important thing I always like to highlight when I can, so mothers people out there know the importance of breastfeeding. So that's definitely, there's a link there.
Actually, Robby, that's a really important point because I'm the youngest brother. My elder brother was breastfed, and I was born as an emergency cesarean section, and my mother was very unwell and she couldn't breastfeed me. My older brother doesn't have type 1 diabetes and I do, so perhaps there's a link.
There's no doubt that it's not like a 100% link, but breast is best, and it's something that we can't talk about enough.
Yeah.
So I was diagnosed at 12, and my family was very familiar. I sort of knew what to do, and I took pretty good care of myself. I was a competitive tennis player, so I was very active. That helped me keep my blood glucose in range. But I still had other problems. I had terrible acne. I had allergies. Every year I would get sick, every single year, several times. I was taking Nasonex, Claritin D. I had plantar fasciitis, so I had to wear these big blue boots at night. And that was really frustrating. And then as I became older in my teenage years, I took a lot of drugs for acne. It was really frustrating, and actually got to the point where in America I took one of the most intense drugs you possibly could take, which was Accutane. So even though my diabetes was under good control, I was still having some other health challenges. So as I started to learn about healthy eating and eventually came to a low-fat, plant-based, whole food diet, that has transformed my life in so many ways. So not only did all those other situations, the plantar fasciitis, the getting sick all the time and taking those Claritin D and acne, all that improved. So I don't take any drugs for skin, I don't take any Claritin D or anything like that. The only drugs I take are insulin. And my overall diabetes health, while I've been doing this, I started the diet in December of 2006. So for over 10 years, I've been eating nothing but fruits and vegetables. And I know the diabetes community is in general a little bit wary of carbohydrates, especially coming from fruit. But I am always happy to share that those foods are actually some of the healthiest foods, and you can have great blood glucose management. So for over 10 years of doing this, never had an A1C above 6.4. My current A1C is 5.9. I've never been hospitalized for being low, for anything like that. So that's just like a quick summary of my background.
So I think there's something important here. You're talking about all these fruits and vegetables. I know a lot of people with type 1 diabetes who follow a low carbohydrate diet, and they claim that they get the best results in terms of their blood glucose management. And I did that for many years. I followed a low carbohydrate diet for about 5 or 6 years, and yeah, my blood glucose levels were absolutely brilliant. But I didn't feel well in many other ways. And so can you tell us a little bit about following a high carbohydrate diet, which is essentially what you're doing?
This whole topic of you doing the very low carb approach versus what Cyrus and I at Mastering Diabetes are teaching the very low fat approach.
Yep.
The whole conversation around that to me it's fun. I mean, it gets very heated and very opinionated, and I understand. I cannot emphasize enough how much respect Cyrus and I have for people like Dr. Bernstein, for the people following that program. Look, if you are a type 1 Anybody living with type 1, there's this automatic kinship. You just know each other. You know what I mean? You understand, why somebody would want to do that approach. Like, to have a flat line blood glucose, not have to really worry about calculating carbs, how much do I dose, the ups and there's ups and downs. That's if you can eat a low fat, high carbohydrate diet, you're gonna have to deal with the ups and downs. So I get it, and it's a fascinating conversation, and we're not out there to pick fights or tell people they're bad or wrong. We're just trying to share what's worked for us. You saw it happen for you, and why we're passionate about it personally. So for me, I did the super low carb approach for only 1 month. So it was only 1 month, but I had the experience of seeing myself take the least amount of insulin I have ever taken. My total insulin, basal plus bolus, was about 11 units. And that's the lowest it's ever been. Right now, on a high carbohydrate diet, I'm more like 40-ish units. So this is the point number one. So there's the confusion around the difference between reduced total insulin need and insulin sensitivity. So I was eating roughly 30 grams of carbohydrate per day and taking like 11 units. That's like a 3-to-1 24-hour ratio. So the total insulin dose is 11. The best way to measure the insulin sensitivity is you take the total carbohydrate consumed divided by the total insulin, and that would be 30 divided by 11. You're roughly at 3-to-1. So now we're talking about the diet that I'm following now is more around 700, 750, sometimes 800 grams of carbohydrate per day. You divide that by a total of 40-ish units, sometimes it's a little lower. And now we're talking about a much higher insulin sensitivity ratio. So that's an important distinction to make in this conversation. But in general, there's just a lot of unfounded fear around fruit. And fruit is a great food in general because it's full of fiber and nutrients and water content. It's much different than refined sugars. It's much different than breads. It's a terrific food for people living with diabetes. People can watch what I ate videos on my YouTube channel, and they can see my blood glucose profile. I have a Dexcom, so they can see exactly how these big carbohydrate meals are affecting my blood glucose. And at the end of the day, I'll give you guys the most important tip. This is exclusive information here, Paul. Very important, okay? If you're living with type 1 diabetes and you want to successfully implement a low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet, insulin timing is the key. So number one, assuming you follow it properly, you actually stick to the low-fat, which is no more than 15% of calories from fat, 15% of total calories from fat maximum, or you can look at it as a total grams of fat, never exceeding no more than 30 grams of fat. Closer to 20 grams is better, closer to 10% of calories from fat is better. So if you're doing that and you're moving your body, assuming you're doing that, the big thing is insulin timing. So people they'll try this approach, they'll inject insulin, and then they'll eat right away, which is something you could do on a higher fat diet. Usually you have a little bit more of a grace period. Some people even take insulin after eating, which is not recommended, but people do it. You cannot do that on a high carbohydrate diet. You will see a dramatic spike. It won't work. So insulin takes a different amount of time to truly become active for each individual. And you got to figure it out for you when it becomes active. So, for example, somebody might have a blood glucose, you're going to have to convert these numbers, but somebody might have a blood glucose of, let's say, 130. Okay?
Yep.
And then they want to eat a meal, so let's say they inject 4 units for their meal. If they might test their blood glucose 15 minutes later, their blood glucose might be 140. Okay? It might have been trending up. Yep. Okay? So that's a huge thing there. Because you were going up, the insulin's not really working yet. You waited 15 minutes, which most people don't do, but you have to. So if you then test yourself again in another 15 minutes, you might be 125, 120-ish. That's when it's time to eat. So our guideline is if you're on this program, you can eat a high carbohydrate meal, low fat, high carbohydrate meal. Your blood glucose needs to be 120 and going down. Insulin needs to be working before you eat that meal. And that is how you get a really nice rolling hill or a more steady line on a high carbohydrate diet. And again, I can't emphasize enough. I understand the appeal for people living with type 1 diabetes of having a flat blood glucose line. I get it. But that's not actually normal physiology. So a normal non-diabetic, there's a curve, it's normal, it's a part of our physiology. And there's actually a lot of hormones and things that happen due to those small spikes and coming down. So avoiding that is not necessarily healthier. I get that it's easier and it's better for people living with type 1 as far as the ability to manage their day and insulin, and taking these small dosages, I get it. And for people who choose that approach, that's great. If it's working for you, keep doing it. Like, we're not here to start fights. But if for anybody like you got to a point where it wasn't the best for you. You tried something else, and we're here to show people there's another option. Hopefully we can be respected in the community for the science that we have supporting our approach, our experience, our clients' experience, and it's something we're really passionate about sharing with people.
So, Robby, you were talking about insulin sensitivity.
Yeah.
Why is insulin sensitivity so important?
Okay, that's a great question. So, insulin resistance is mostly talked about in the world of type 2 diabetes. So people know that the cause of type 2 diabetes is insulin resistance. Now, and if you reverse insulin resistance, you can reverse type 2 diabetes. That's well known. People in the alternative world, they know that. You know, maybe the big diabetes associations aren't really talking about that, but anybody in the alternative world, we know that. Now, for people living with type 1 and type 1.5 diabetes, insulin resistance is rarely talked about, and that is a mistake. So insulin resistance is, number one, it makes it harder to manage your blood glucose. That's number one. And number two, it's linked with a lot of other chronic diseases. So people living with diabetes, including type 1, the number one killer is heart disease. We don't die of high blood glucose readings. We die of the number one complication of diabetes, heart disease. So you could have great numbers, but if you're still insulin resistant, you're increasing your risk for heart disease. So that's really the biggest reason.
So that's a really good point, because heart disease is the number one killer of people with diabetes, type 1 and type 2.
Yeah.
And if we follow a low carbohydrate, high fat diet, are we in fact having great blood glucose levels but increasing our risk for cardiovascular disease?
So yes, that would be our position. Yes. And again, I think, you got to acknowledge the people out there, the Bernstein crew, and like there's a group on Facebook called Type 1 Grit. There's a lot of people really into this. And I think their argument, fair enough, would be that, nobody has really studied super long-term effects of having that good glucose control in a population of type 1s. So they would say, maybe it's up in the air. But, if you look at just any amount of general peer-reviewed research out there about insulin resistance, and there's a lot of ways to measure insulin resistance. You could do an oral glucose tolerance test, you could do a clamp test, and if you're not performing well on any of those methods, that's a bad sign. It's a bad sign. There's also people out there doing a vegan ketogenic diet, and they'll be like, oh, hey, we're not having the animal products, blah, 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 maybe we'll be okay. To be determined. The longest lived societies on the planet were following a high carbohydrate diet. So you can look at the Blue Zones to learn about those societies. It's a terrific book, but the people who have the longest lives, the healthiest longevity, are people who are eating carbohydrates, not completely avoiding them.
Yeah. So I think that there's another part on this, because my journey with diabetes is 40 years in the making now, and in recent years I've become more and more active in terms of sports and challenges that I've done, and I've just completed 40 half marathons. Now, I was running half marathons on a low carbohydrate diet, and I found that I could go out and I could run a half marathon and I could manage my blood glucose levels on a low carbohydrate diet, and that was possible. But for me, I couldn't recover from running a half marathon, and it would take me many, many weeks or even months before I actually felt that I was able to go out and do a long distance run again. And I can now go out and run a half marathon today, and I could run another one tomorrow. And I know this because I've done it.
Because you also ran 40 in a year. It's amazing, Paul.
So I'm a big advocate of a high carbohydrate, low fat diet, I never ever thought that I would say that. I'm not sitting here sharing this knowledge with you because I'm trying to sell this as an idea to you. I'm telling you from the benefit of my experience, this worked well for me. If a low carbohydrate diet works well for you, then great, but at least listen to the arguments around a high carbohydrate diet and the benefits that could bring for you.
Absolutely. I think as a community, we all need to respect each other. And I think everybody needs to make a strong effort to say factual things about each other. Saying, like, let's what are the facts? What does the science really say? And let's just go there. And when people take the time to look into eating a low-fat, plant-based, whole food diet for insulin sensitivity, it's so clear. It's so clear, it's unbelievable. And the research of people reversing type 2 diabetes on this approach, when again, the low carb community is consistently saying carbohydrates are the problem. They are the problem, they're the cause. And it's like, please don't say that. It's just completely inaccurate, and we're gonna obviously make our best effort to only say accurate things about what they're doing. And you can't deny the good results they get. That's wonderful, and I'm happy for them.
So we can talk a little bit about the results that I had, because I did a program with Dr. Cyrus Kambata and with Robby, and when I started the program, I was following the low carbohydrate diet. I was having, on average, I was having 73 grams of carbohydrates a day, and on that program I was having about 37 units of insulin. And within 3 months of starting the low-fat, high-carbohydrate program, I was consuming around about 400 grams of carbohydrates a day, and I was taking less insulin than I'd taken on a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet, which just kind of blew my mind. And within 6 months, I was actually at a point where I was on 1 unit of insulin for 50 grams of carbohydrate. And I went along to see my diabetologist, and he looked at my insulin pump download, and he said to me, "This isn't your download, this belongs to somebody else."
This is great.
And I said to him, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, this can't be yours. A 1-year-old child needs more insulin than you're taking for a meal. How are you doing this? This can't be right. You must be making a mistake." And when I showed him my data and my results, he sat there and he just said, "I wish I could share this with more of my patients, but the medical guidelines don't allow me."
Yep, understood. Understood. You gotta understand where the doctor's coming from. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing, and I think anybody out there watching this that is skeptical, I mean, all I can say is give it a shot. Like, give it a really good shot. Some people, when they transition to this lifestyle, they do it 1 meal at a time, and they do that, slowly over the course of a month. That's cool. Do that. But tell yourself, I want to give this a shot, and string together 30 days of really, truly doing low fat. Use Chronometer, use Neutrino, use whatever food logging app you prefer to objectively know how much fat you're eating. Stick to no more than 30 grams of fat, or 15% of calories from fat, over the 30 days in a row. And as a type 1, every single time, you will see a dramatic improvement in your insulin sensitivity. Every time we run retreats, in 4 days, we see these dramatic results with people. And we're literally feeding them buffets of unlimited amounts of fruit and clean starches like butternut squashes, chickpeas, lentils, beans, foods like that. Unlimited quantities, you eat as much as you want. We obviously teach people how to calculate their carbs, and every single time in 4 days, dramatic improvements in insulin sensitivity.